like to thank you all for coming. My name is Maggie Schultz. I am the Education Coordinator here at the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. Thank you for coming to our Driftless Dialogue this morning. This is provided free to you by a generous grant from the Ralph Newsom Lecture Series and the Kickapoo Reforestation Fund through the UW-Madison College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, the Friends of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, and it's also supported by Badger Talks. So those are the people who have made this possible today. Our speaker today is Al Cornell, and he is a retired Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources wildlife technician. He's also a member of the Wildlife Society. He has over 200 articles dealing with wildlife ecology or outdoor inspiration published in outdoor magazines, and over 700 wildlife photos in magazines, books, and calendars. And we're very excited to have him here today, so please welcome Al Cornell.
Thank you. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version today because I can get going a little too much about this stuff, and we got other things to do sometime today. So I'm just going to be going through the year and the events, some of the events that hit some highlights of what transpired. It was a year ago last April. The snow had knocked down the vegetation, and so we could see this beaver pond was just a mile down the road from our place. And Sally and I were driving down there, and we saw an eagle flying over, and he stooped toward the pond, and he was coming in fast, and a wood duck just shot out below the dam to get away from him. And it kind of was a light came on in my head. Hey, there's something going on here. I need to see what's happening at the beaver pond. And I contacted the landowner and got permission to go in and set up my little blind that I spent over 400 hours in, then observing and photographing the events that went on. And I was amazed at the things that happened. So the pictures are just in sequence of how they were taken. The Phoebe here has come in the middle of April and is sitting on one of the willows that has been chomped off. The willows went down in the area to that first year. They used up everything. It's an area of limited resources, and they can come back into it after a few years, but they have to move out after they've depleted the willow. And after the landowner decided, I better not plant any more corn next to that because it was being utilized in food stashes. So one of the neat things about the place was as the sun came up over the east and shone on the western hillside where the green vegetation was all down, in the early spring, I got this golden glow on the pond, which turned out nice for some of the photography that was taking place there. And I just want to see if this is going to work on, nope, it doesn't show up on the, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, so I'll, oh, sure, okay. So, yeah, we had geese there. The one thing that I just associate with beaver ponds is wood ducks. I expect wood ducks, and they didn't disappoint. They were there throughout the year and were a big part of it. The spring warbler migration, the first ones that come in, of course, are going to be the yellow-rumped warblers. And there's a stick sticking up there, and spring thaw had this vegetation had washed in around it, and so on this nice frosty morning, the water, none of the water in the pond comes from more than a mile away. So it's coming out of the ground at 47 degrees, and it doesn't have time to freeze. So the pond never froze over all winter last year because of that. So it'd be a little warmer place, there'd be a little more insect activity, and so anybody that's feeding on insects would want to show up at the pond. The beaver itself was quite nocturnal, didn't show up a lot of the time, but from time to time and over the extended period of time, we got quite a bit of sightings of the beaver. And they have this trick of cleaning off the bark from usually a willow or can be aspen or various things. And this one's eating its, I don't know whether you'd call it supper or breakfast, because it's about ready to go to bed for the day. And in the early morning, it's busy eating. This common yellowthroat, they're the only species of warbler that nests in the wetlands. All the other warblers want shrubs or trees for their nesting areas, but the common yellowthroat is, so it's one that's very common in the area. This one's eyeballing the dewdrop there. I don't know whether he ate it or not. I can't answer that question. It remains a mystery whether he went for it. And then by the middle of May, there was toad season. They come in for the mating season, of course, and spend a few days there. And suddenly that din, the constant of the red-winged blackbirds disappears. And because the toads are so noisy, so loud, that they drown out the red-winged blackbird noise. Of course, ducks are going to be a part of the users of the pond. Mallards and wood ducks are going to be the primary ones that I saw there. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of the setup. You see the dam goes right across, the blind's right at the end of it. Notice that willow that's still standing. Don't ask me why, but the beavers left that one. It might have been just the difficulty of cutting it off or whatever, but I think they left it for me because it was in the perfect spot. It's 20 feet from the camera lens, and I had a lot of little birds land there and opportunity to photograph a lot of things in connection with it. So it's just 70 yards to the cornfield, and then I have to go, of course, 24 rows of corn to get to the car parked along the road. The kingbird was one of the larger flycatchers, and kind of dominating, you know, the sequence of pecking order among birds, and so it was one that tended to drive off some other things from time to time until the swallows got too abundant, and then it gave up. And no sense of chasing swallows. The expectation of wood ducks certainly was fulfilled. This hen came in with 4 ducklings. You think, well, 4, she probably laid 10, 12 eggs. Up on the hillside somewhere, very good chance that it would have been in a pileated woodpecker abandoned nest hole. If you look at the range map of the pileated woodpecker and the wood duck, there's so much overlap because they use those abandoned pileated woodpecker nest holes very, very commonly, of course, nesting, cavity nesting. But she ended up with the 4. You think jumping out of the tree, well, that hardly ever damages a baby wood duck. They're kind of like a rubber ball, bounce a little and take off. But then they had to go across 100 yards of the meadow, which had been flattened, plus the new growth, and it seemed like that would be a really difficult thing for them to negotiate. And probably a lot of the wood ducks, the earliest eggs laid, even though she pulls out her down feathers and covers the eggs, still some of the earliest ones end up not hatching because of the exposure to the cold at the time of the year. So she's got 4, and that was a great expectation. The hen wood duck would fly off every morning for 45 minutes to an hour. And the ducklings, they would swim around feeding, and on this cold morning, they got together. There was, over on the other side, there was this one place where the bank was a little higher, and so there was that exposed bank, and it warmed up with the sunshine. And so those ducklings gathered over there. And the mallard drake swam over there and spent about a half an hour like he was Uncle Donald taking care of the brood while Mom was off doing whatever she did every morning. In this case, Mom was there. This is early morning light, so it was consequently not the best color. But this beaver, probably a yearling, he's, well, pretty sure it is a yearling, probably 12, 15 pounder. He comes over the dam and he starts swimming right out to the brood, the hen and her chicks. And she swam between them She opened her beak and told Beaver to get out of there, and he did. Later on, we'll come across the muskrat, and the story changes a little bit when you get there. Beaver are herbaceous, vegetarian, they're not going to be eating ducks. Muskrat, on the other hand, could. The kingfishers were pretty busy there. There was a lot of these fingerling brown trout in the pond. They're just jumping thick, and it's always impressive as to how large a fish these fish-eating birds take on, and it always looks pretty impressive that shouldn't have to eat for a week. The muskrats were harvesting a lot of the greens. They would swim across the pond, and as they're swimming across the pond, sometimes all you would see was the green moving toward their den hole. There was so much of it. And reading in the literature, it sounded like that they were taking that in for bedding, but they just kept taking more and more and more. And I envisioned that they had dug out a big dining hall in there, and all the young ones were coming around, and they were piling it up and feeding on it. The young ones leave the den when they're about a month old. They're on their own because the next these prolific species, like rabbits, they're multiplying pretty fast, and so the young ones have to get out of there, and the new ones come in. But I imagine they were chewing on a little bit of that vegetation that was coming into the den. I was glad to have this muskrat eating down some of the grass. On the pond, it opened up shooting lanes for me to photograph. Otherwise, it kind of got a little too much. The other fish, and according to the fish biologists, these are about the only things that spend time that far up these cold water streams, is the trout, of which we have the brown trout is the main one I see here, and also have some brook trout. And then there's these sculpin. And there's a couple different species of those. And the biologist from the fish biologist from La Crosse, Kurt Olson, said that he don't understand how these birds can even see these things. They're so well camouflaged, these little bitty fish, but I imagine they probably rely on movement to see where they're at. Raccoons would come in, and they're always reaching down in, rubbing their paws together, and then they come to the mouth. And you think, well, there's a lot of gook in there. What are they getting? But imagine yourself sitting here, and you're reaching over and you're feeling in a plate that has crushed rock gravel and marbles. Can you tell the difference? Yeah, you can pick them out. Well, in the same way, these guys with their prehensile, the feelings that they've got in their feet and so forth, they can rub their paws together, and they know what they want to put in their mouth and what they don't want to put in their mouth, apparently. Ma beaver, there was a little flattened out patch of grass on the other side of the pond there, and I wondered what it was, and found out that ma beaver liked to come there and groom from time to time. When they're establishing beaver where they've been wiped out, which happens a lot in the mountains, because the many positive events that you get from more water table, more water running through the year, and various things where you got beaver and don't, compared to where you don't have them, or if you have a fire that charcoals the mountainsides and you get this green strip up the middle because you got beaver there, and it isn't dried up to the edge, and so there's so many positive effects. But beaver have all their genitalia on the inside. You can't look at them and say, well, this is a male and that's a female. It's very hard to do. And they want to put equal numbers, they don't want to get 6 males up there somewhere and try to establish a population or whatever. So you got to be able to tell them apart. And what do? They smell the back end of them, because they have this castor gland, and that's, for beaver trappers, that's probably more valuable than hides right now. But it's used for a lot of things. I know it's been used for perfumes and different things. But it smells different between the males and the females, and so they can tell them apart by sniffing. Now, ducks keep the water out. And the way they do that, by oiling the feathers. And they can reach all their feathers except those around the head and the neck. What they usually do, I believe, is that they take the bill, they stick it back to the oil gland, which is located back here. They get oil on the bill, and then they rub it on the feathers. And if they want to do their head, they take their foot and wipe the beak, and then use the foot to put it on the head. But these two are mutually grooming. I don't know how common that is, but getting those hard to reach places on one another. Notice the difference in the two ducks. I'll just point it out here. This one's got a large teardrop eye ring, and this one's got a smaller one. This one's got white along the edge of the bill, that one doesn't. And so you can tell them apart by that.
Is that male and female?
No, that's two females, two hens, yeah. Yeah. So here, little beaver went over the dam, and the water was dropping during the summer. I kind of wondered, what's happening here. The beaver weren't keeping it full. There wasn't any water going over the top. There's always water running through. There's always water running underneath, and so all the water was going, disappearing, and the beaver weren't keeping it up. So we got a lot of mud flat, which I found out was great for me in photography. The mud flat just was a great place for that. But little beaver here went over, grabbed a little willow whip off from the willows that were growing on the dam itself. I imagine it was the root stumps underneath that had sprouted up through, and we're providing those. So raccoons we think of as being nocturnal, but in summer the nights get shorter and you don't have enough time to get everything done during the night, so they're out more in the daytime. I think that's part of it. The other part may be that they just need to get out there a little more with the young ones. The cedar waxwings showed up, and I always associated them with eating berries. I thought that's basically what they lived on. But they were coming over the pond, and inside the circle there's a moth fly. We generally call them drain flies because we name everything after how they do things that we don't like. And people have drains that are wet, and the moth flies get to be bad, so you go online and look up drain flies and it tells you how to get rid of them, that kind of thing. But on the beaver pond, I call them moth flies because they were such an integral part of the biomass of food that was taking place there. And these waxwings will set on perches out on the willow that's standing there, and some of the whips and the dam. And when they see a bug, they'll go after it. And so a lot of times there will be more than one going after the same bug. They're converging on the moth fly. Other things that fly over the pond or near it anyway include this flying grasshopper and the willow flycatcher that I could hear a lot of times on the other side of the pond showed up with the flying grasshopper in its beak and set on the willow in front of me. Red-winged blackbird seems to be scolding the blind there with that one big roving eye. It doesn't, I'm sure that interfered with a few things coming, but most things put up with it quite well. I actually, in front of the blind, I've attached mosquito netting, camouflage mosquito netting, and put a hole in it so that I would be less visible in the blind. On the 12th of July, I had a big surprise because a second brood of wood ducks showed up, and this would be a late brood. Almost certainly she had a failed first brood and re-nested and ended up with a second brood, and 7 of them showed up at the pond. And when they're a day old, they know what an earthworm is. When I was a kid and Mom raised chickens, we'd like to throw a worm in there as soon as she got those baby chickens, and they'd go crazy over it, we'd have fun. And so the baby wood duck comes over real close to the blind and finds a earthworm on the dam. It was neat to get the great blue heron to show up close because I had this impression that they were pretty wary, and surprised that it came in and regularly, quite a few times, came in and lit in the willow right in front of me. The shorebirds can go north, get their seasonal mating stuff taken care of, and go back south fairly early. And so while it's still getting late into July, the shorebirds can start coming back. And this solitary sandpiper showed up, and I suppose you've noticed that it has this here, stub leg. It probably got caught, very, very likely a snapping turtle got a hold of its leg, and in the ensuing struggle, it ended up without that leg. It's completely healed over, and it was doing pretty good. It wasn't, walking around like the rest of them. It was doing a little hop thing there, but seemed to be doing all right. So that was my hero of the pond. The wood ducks were just photogenic, and now this second brood, you got at least a female, if not the female, with the larger teardrop white around the eye and white around the beak. One crane fly equals 40 moth flies or something like that, and so it was nice to pick that off. Also, I don't think I got any of the pictures here, but I got a couple of times I shot some bird with these crane fly larvae, big old ugly looking black larvae that they were carrying. The muskrat was not so fun for the wood ducks. You see the wake here where mama took off? She got out of there. Now you would see them out there together on the pond quite often, but it was just this time. Muskrat turned on the jets and really went streaking after the wood ducks, and so one by land and one by sea, they're getting out of there, and they escaped. They got away this time. They avoided. Any animal that produces an awfully lot of young is going to lose a lot along the way, and so wood ducks growing up, maybe half of them that initially make it to the pond end up to where they're fledged and able to fly, but the population's going to pretty well balance out from year to year, and a lot of ducklings have to go. Muskrat didn't catch any that time, but something had reduced the number from 7 to 5. This is a immature orchard oriole. We haven't had them around too long, but the bright yellow showing up on this. So he stopped over. The blue-winged warbler didn't get a lot of species of warblers. Had 61 species of birds, but not very many warblers. Most of them are staying in the wood. The woodland warblers. That's where they're going to be, mostly in woods and bushes. As the jewelweed was coming on, I knew, okay, I'm going to have hummingbirds. What I didn't realize is when you got the jewelweed is pioneering. It's not out there where the reed canary grass and sedges and stuff are dominating, and later the goldenrods dominate. It doesn't fit into that category. So, but the dam is new ground, and so it was blooming all the way across the dam, and so there's 10,000 blooms there, and the hummingbird goes zip zip zip, and you don't get, okay, he's on that bloom. No, he's gone from that bloom by the time you move the camera. So what you do is you got one coming across and working his way towards you. Focus on a blossom that's close to the blind, and hope that when he lands there, your trigger finger is going to work quick enough to capture a picture. This was my companion in the blind for 10 days or so. The female wolf spider, she's got her egg cluster there, and in that little blind, she's 9 inches from my ear. I'd get in there, come in the early morning, and I'd look in there, and I could kind of see a little white spot starting to show up where the spider webbing was, and there she was, sitting on her egg cluster, and then about the 5th time that I'd been in the blind with her, I see these little brown things moving away from the egg cluster, and that came to an end. With that water being drawn, drawn down during the summer and all those mud flats. There was just a lot of things happening that wouldn't happen otherwise. This poor cottontail was living out there where all that vegetation had lodged from the year before and all that new vegetation was growing. I don't know how it can even get around out there, but it really enjoyed coming out onto the mud flats, chewing some of that new emerging grass that's coming up there and running up and down along the edge of the pond. Cedar waxwings, this is a young one. You can tell by the colors of the head. It doesn't have any of the wax spots on the tips of the secondary wing feathers. But the thing that's kind of unusual about this one is the orange tip of the tail. They usually have a yellow tip of the tail. In fact, if you went back 70 years ago, you probably wouldn't find any with orange tips of the tail because the orange tip of the tail is a response to invasive honeysuckles. The Japanese honeysuckle. It has a different carotenoid pigment in it than their normal food sources have that is close enough to the one that's normally used that it replaces the one that's normally there, and so you end up with the orange tip of the tail. So you say, oh, the parents of this one fed it a lot of those Japanese honeysuckle fruit. Then when it molts and grows back its tail, it'll probably be yellow. The other thing fascinating about the waxwings is that cowbirds hardly ever survive in a waxwing nest, and that's because as very young, the nestlings eat mostly fruit, just about all fruit, whereas almost all young birds eat a high protein diet of insects and stuff. These guys eat they go on a fruit diet very young, and they're able to survive on it, but the cowbird can't. And so, yay. The Louisiana water thrush goes through in the spring, comes back in the fall. If you have a concept of the division in the state, the word's slipping my mind right now, the tension zone in the state that starts kind of northwest and swings down to Lake Michigan. And the main thing that's distinguished between the two parts of the tension zone is you got more conifers, the obvious part. You got more conifers in the north, less in the south. But you also have birds that respond to this. And so the nesting northern water thrush is normally north of the tension zone. Sedge wren sitting on one of the willow whips. Now all these little willow stumps that's been cut off out there grew up a whip that first year. But then because they're waterlogged all the time, they end up dying. And eventually those have just about all broken off as time went on. But they were used a lot by the birds that were feeding and coming to the pond. This is a young veery. You can tell it's young if you can, it probably shows up pretty good, I think, here, but you see the yellow extended from the beak on out underneath the eyeball. And that's part of the gape. When they're saying, Mommy and Daddy stuff the worms in here, you know, and they make it as big as they can, that's part of that gape. So as long as they're nestlings and as long as they're fledglings that are being fed by the adults, that's important to them, and then it disappears pretty quickly after they grow out of that, no longer gaping. This was one of the last of the jewelweed. You see one of the seed pods here and another one up there. And so I focused on the one close to the blind bumblebee used. Another shot of the pond, you just get an idea of it. Here you see the vegetation along the top of the pond has changed over now. There's not any jewelweed there. There's a lot of bidens. Bidens here, bidens there. Tick trefoil, it's also called. And great food source for ducks and a lot of other birds. I saw red-winged blackbirds and goldfinches eating out of those seed heads. And so that's changed over. The jewelweed, if you're familiar with it, has such weak stems, big fat, and they break off really easy stems. And so it's all lodged now, and the Bidens are there. And so it's the time of year as we get into autumn when the sparrows start migrating through. You've had a lot of the other passerines that have stayed around, the small songbirds and stuff, and have migrated out quicker, and the sparrows start coming in. This swamp sparrow has, I think, such a neat pattern of colors. You know, they're not all just little brown things. There's some stuff besides that. As fall comes and the sun is rising and shining off from that far hillside, and you got all those maples lit up, it gives this coloration to the picture. Now, as soon as the direct sunlight hits the pond, you lose that. There's hardly any of that left. You just don't see that color at all at that point in time. So one of those baby muskrats that got kicked out comes over by the blind. The beaver had pulled this piece of wood up close to the dam. They hadn't decided yet, I guess, exactly where they wanted to use it. Later it got incorporated into the pond, but it was sitting there, and this little guy came over to take a look. I think a muskrat can be cute. Not a lot of species of ducks use these little bitty ponds, but from time to time something shows up. And so this gadwall was sharing the pond. And ducks, if there's a variety of species of ducks, they'll tend to be together. More eyes, better protection from predators and whatnot. And so even if it can be mallards and wood ducks primarily on this pond, but the others also, like this one, swam with and fed among the other ducks. Wood duck just kind of special as far as that coloration is concerned. The snipe like to roost right at the foot of the blind. And so I'd come in the morning and it'd flush off, and then it'd come back and start feeding somewhere along the dam, as it is in this case. And it could spend a half an hour going a couple of feet. And it's constantly, it's a happy meal all the time because it's constantly bobbing. It's just going up and down and inserting that beak, and sometimes into the same hole over and over and over again. And you think, wow, why in the same hole? Maybe it's going a little different angle, I don't know. But remember the rocks and the marbles? It's got a prehensile bill. The tip of the bill has a lot of nerves on it. It can feel and tell the difference between something good and something that's not so good to eat. And so it's constantly probing for the under that mud is just loaded with the larvae of so many different kinds of insects and those moth flies and the midges and everything that's there. And these things are just feeding on those. The mink came up, ran up around the corner and out of sight. My pond is 70 foot wide and 130 foot long, about 1/10 of an acre. That's all there was there. And it curved and went out of sight for me and went over to the bank den, a higher bank where the beaver had tunneled underneath to form their bank den. It didn't have a lodge. And so the mink goes up around the corner, and there's some splashing and carrying on. I didn't know what happened there. And he comes back down around. Little ways over here is that bank where the little ducks were and when the mallard drake was with him. He comes down around that, and he comes down to Ma Beaver's flattened pad there. And he's looking upstream, and there's two wood ducks coming around the corner. Well, this is going to get interesting. And the wood ducks started getting a little bit closer, and all of a sudden the mink jumps into the water, and he takes off the other way toward the dam, heading downstream. And the wood ducks speed up. They're chasing him. Now that turned my idea upside down, and I got a second view of it later on in the next spring. So through the winter, then things are pretty quiet. This is, I think, the start of a castor patty that they make for scent marking. And again, the scent is pretty strong. Scent is used to a great extent by beaver. They spend a lot of time in a lodge and underwater and bank dens where sight doesn't do you any good, and so scent was a major factor that they use. There's just a view of the dam in the winter, and you see that they were cutting prickly ash, and I think that's part of the indication that this is going to be a place that's cyclic for them. They're not going to be sustained there. They've taken out all the willow like the first year. The next year they hit the cornfield a little harder. Not too exciting for the farmer, but they hit the corn a little harder, and their food stashes had a little more corn in them. And now they're cutting prickly ash, but they use it like a fence across the top of the dam. You know, you've probably seen videos of all these animals crossing these beaver dams and using them as a trail route. Well, they weren't going to use this one. It was fenced. The willows that stood out there are pretty well gone now. You can see that Beaver was chewing a little bit over there somewhere. I can't see that from my angle. Anyway, on the end there, and some of the others, they were just getting rotten and breaking off, and the whole thing was dying down. So that was that perch was going to go away before too long. I stepped out of the blind, took a picture of the eagle flying over, just kind of remembrance of that first eagle that got my attention, and I thought, well, yeah, I need to spend a little time there. Little did I know how much time it was going to be. Here's some box elders that they've been eating, chewing off, and again, the indication that the primary food gone. There was some elms standing on the other side of the pond from in, and one day I noticed, oh, that elm's not there anymore. I walked over and I see some stumps where they'd been chomping them down, and I think that was probably preferred over the box elder, and as kind of last resort food that they were using there. This is a caddisfly on the edge of the pond. All those trout out in there saying, come on, you can fly on out here. And these guys can make it in very, very cold weather. They have an antifreeze. Their hemolymph is actually an antifreeze in the system, and so they can survive in some pretty cold weather. The bluebirds were around. Did get a couple to show up in the fall, I guess, but just about any month you're there sitting in the blind, you could hear bluebirds calling, but they didn't show up at the pond too often. I'm kind of surprised by that, because I would have thought during that cold weather, especially when that warm water was creating a situation where there was more insects for them to feed on, but they did show up some then in the early spring. And spring migration then, we got the wood ducks coming back and reclaiming it. And I was very happy with how comfortable they were 20 feet from the lens, and would relax there. This was the hardest picture to get. I don't know how many times I was ready. You know, the midges were hatching, the trout were jumping, and I would see the nose of the trout come out, and I'd swing on it, and I'd push the button, and I got a ripple of water. And you know, how many times did I have to do that before? No, that just doesn't work. And then I noticed a trout jump when a midge flew off. These midges come to the surface in the pupa, and when they hit the surface, they break out of their pupa, and they run and buzz on top of the water for a few feet, and then they fly off. And it's probably 15 seconds from the time they get to the surface until they fly off. Longer than that, yeah, you're probably going to get eaten. So they're quick to get out of there. And so these trout were feeding, and I saw a couple of them jump at a midge that flew off. And so I started focusing on the midge, and I had to focus manually because the camera always wanted to show me all the reflection of the trees and everything off from the hillside behind there, and it just kept, out of focus, kept going to that. And so with the manual focus, I focused on the midge, and when it flew, I took a picture and tried that. I think it was only like the third time that I tried it. And you see here that the midge is up at the top there. He got away, the escaped midge. And this midge hatch takes place a pretty short period of time, pretty quick that they take place. And then you'll see these columns of them outside the water, the ones that escaped before the trout got them. And that's their breeding columns. And then the female will come back over and she'll dip, dip, and she's dropping some eggs every place she goes, and they settle to the bottom and start the cycle over again for the next season. But I got them completely out of the water. It was in the afternoon, late afternoon, so that I had the backlighting, and I was pretty happy with my trout picture. Mink again, and okay, here's the yellow-shafted flicker, yellow-shafted subspecies of the northern flicker. Blue-winged teal came back, spent a little more time there. This last April now we're dealing with, this past April. The interesting thing here is the background behind the wood duck is kind of green, and it doesn't show up as good, but the reflection is that brown color of the reflection from the hill and sky and whatnot, and so the head shows up better in the reflection than it does in the actual bird. So here's a trout coming after a midge. It was just this one day when the light was right, so I could see these trout moving underneath the water and photograph them as they were feeding. And then the one day when there was a lot of snow, Sally would take me down the road and drop me off. It was a mile from home, and I'd go in and photograph and then walk home when I was done, because there wasn't room to park the car along the road. And so when we had this April snowstorm this past year, I think about the 15th or 16th, I think this was taken on the 17th, and you got green grass growing up through, and the beaver were hungry from overwinter. They do store a little fat at the base of their tail, but that's part of what they need for overwintering. And so this beaver was reaching up to get everything that it possibly could off from the box elder. They tipped it over, but there were some limbs kind of holding it up so that it wasn't really down where they could work on it as much as they wanted to, and they dealt with it. And both of them are out trying to find something to eat. And this happened, I said I didn't have the blind up. Well, I did by this time, I guess. But part of the winter I had it down so it wouldn't get flattened by the snow. And I spent some time, a couple hours in the blind. Short winter sessions were short because they were boring. Wasn't anything happening. And I got back up on the road, and I was walking up along the road, and I saw these beaver down there, and I shot them as I was leaving. Of course, they weren't on my pond and, per se, but it was up around the corner, close to their lodge, bank den. So the next morning, this guy showed up. He had been there. First time he came, it was early morning. I just got in there. It was too dark. I did take one picture, one grainy picture of him sticking his head up. And then 2 times after that, he came up through the vegetation on the dam and into the water. Couldn't get a picture. And I just thought I was never going to get, this was the one that just wasn't going to happen. And I saw him a couple more times in the spring then. And then this time, in the perfect light, when the sun is shining on the west hill, and so I got the golden pond, he comes and shows up. I saw him roll toward the upper end of the channel where it comes in. I thought, was that just a beaver, or was it the otter? And he starts feeding in the pond. He's swimming back and forth, coming around, and he pops up here in front of me. And after I take this one picture, then he starts staring at the blind. I took a bunch of pictures of that, but I like this one better. He's got the drips of water on his whiskers, and he's not distracted by the blind. And so it gave me the picture I wanted. The yellow-rumped warblers were feeding. You can see in his beak, maybe you can see he's got some little larvae. He was picking them off the top of the water. There was a little bit of floating algae. Fortunately, we're upstream where floating algae doesn't last very long. I've worked on phloiges where it persists all summer because there's a lot of agricultural fields and a lot of phosphorus coming into the system. And so you got the algae all year. I was worried about the first time I saw it on here, but it didn't last very long. There just wasn't very many fields contributing to that. So he's picking them off. And there was a bunch of the yellow-rumped warblers pecking order. There was one that said, "The dam is mine, get out of here," and he chased everybody else off. They went on upstream a ways and were feeding, but he sat there making a little noise most of the time, and I think that was enough to tell him to stay out of here. Barn swallow shows up. The willow whips are breaking off now. There's not much left of them. There's just a few standing as we come into the next year. The male kingfisher, no orange belt or orange along the side, just the one belt across the chest of the dark blue-gray. A little bit of sleet falling here. You can see the specks on there, most of them out of focus, but the one white speck on the mink himself is comes out. And wood ducks just constantly giving me opportunities to shoot a lot of pictures. I probably shot 5,000, I suppose, altogether. In this picture, there's an excess of males in just about all ducks, and that's because the females are vulnerable on the nest. Even these cavity nesters, if a mink or coon happens to catch the female in the nest, they can kill them. And so there's this disparity between the sexes, and you got these excess males. And they'll come and they'll be together as a group, the male or males that are pair bonded with females and the excess males, and they get along pretty good most of the time. But if the excess males decide they want to challenge the pair bonded male, then things get a little riled up. And these guys were getting a little too close to the hen here, and I think the guy over there with his beak open, I believe, is the pair bonded male. And he's getting a little excited about their closeness. Sometimes even the female would get excited about, concerned about him, and she would open her beak and tell him to be gone, too. So, flighted swallows was just about out of my league, but this is the best I did at the barn. One barn swallow and one tree swallow in the shot. Back to the kingfisher. This is the female, you see by the rusty color, has this trout. And this is the one, there's 4 pictures in the book. I shot a big sequence of the male and female were sitting on the limb. The male had the trout and the female was bagging. And then they flew off. And next time I could see them further upstream, further away, the female had the trout, and the male was bagging her. It's part of the ritual of their pair bonding. They, pass it back and forth, perhaps. But in the end, the female ends up swallowing the fish, and it's large. And I was very interested. It took her 5 minutes, maybe a little more than that, to get it down. It just kind of slowly would go down a little bit, and she'd jerk around a little bit and go down a little further. And so she finally did get it down. I think she told him, "I'm going to lay the eggs. I need this worse than you do." Actually, they probably both could have come up with all the fish they needed. They're pretty good at it. Sandhill cranes actually would roost overnight standing in the water at the pond. Palm warbler was the second warbler to show up, and so my emphasis in the book and in the story is the ecosystem itself. It's it kind of gets skewed a lot to a beaver family through the year, and certainly they're the primary mover as far as this thing is concerned. They're the builder and so forth, but this is about what happens. This is 1/10 of an acre, and I don't think there's another place, another ecosystem that has this type of activity, in our whole driftless area. I don't think you can find anything that's going to be more intense than these little 1/10 of an acre beaver ponds and what they offer to such a variety of wildlife. And this one ended up, Sally and I worked it over for a while and decided this is the one that goes on the front cover of the book. The great blue heron fished there quite a bit and was unsuccessful. Really, these beaver ponds, I've talked quite a bit. There's some current research concerning trout ponds, and there's more biomass and larger fish in the beaver ponds than there are in the streams that are free-flowing. And this goes against what Wisconsin DNR was promoting for a long time, because of studies that was done in the Northeast where there's not much terrain, and you get bigger beaver ponds. You can get 100 times bigger beaver pond than I had, and the water can warm and you can lose. And the guy that did the 20-year study back then started out by saying, at the very beginning of his study, he said that the beaver are destroying the trout resource in the state. And that was the concept that prevailed and still prevails to quite a big extent, because there's a lot of people who worked with beaver and with trout streams where, as some of you know, Scott Walter likes to call them beaver streams that the trout inhabit. But the idea of beaver dams being important for these species was known in the West for a long time. Now you can go back into the old literature, and the salmon, the same family as trout, and the trout that are out there, they knew there was a great positive correlation. And we in this terrain, in the driftless area, definitely have that. I don't know how much it pertains to other places, but we definitely have that where you get bigger. And why do you get bigger? Because you got 3-4 foot of water in places, and they can stay out of the reach of these types of fishermen most of the time that are going to be picking them off, and so they grow to a larger size in that context. A lot of interesting stuff on that trout research that's going on. For instance, I didn't think a trout could go upstream where there was a beaver dam. And these guys said, well, we tagged them down below the stream and they ended up in the pond. How did they do that? Well, not all the water's going over the top. It's running through, it's running under, and you think, well, that's got quite a bit of force. How can they get through that? But think of salmon in the same family, swimming upstream and jumping in 5-foot waterfalls. They're powerful swimmers. They can really pour it on, and so they could make it through the beaver dams and end up back upstream beyond where they were. Spotted sandpiper was quite noisy, especially when it sat on top of the blind. Rocks are a good part of building materials. As we came into this past spring, and I kind of overlapped my year a little bit, went beyond a year, but the beaver were coming out in the afternoon. Just as soon as the west hillside shaded the pond, this beaver would be out there working every time I was there and keeping the dam up. I think he's just telling us that this is my dam and my pond, and to virtually everything he's saying you can use it. Sticks. Couldn't help but take a few pictures of wood ducks from time to time. They're just too much in your face to avoid. Mink, swimming a lot. My littlest mammal that I had was this least weasel. I saw it running from the base of the blind, and I swung the camera around there and I aimed at a point. I thought, well, if he's going to come back out where I can see him, he's going to be right there, and he never did. And then one other time I saw him swimming on the far side of the pond. I took a couple shots, but they're terrible. Another picture of the sandpiper. As we got into the hot, dry weather, a couple of bucks showed up. They were splashing around down below the dam, and I never know for sure what that is. I heard that one time carrying on, and then the otter popped over the dam, and so he'd been down there splashing around. But I'm hearing this splashing, and there were two of these bucks that showed up at the pond to drink and to splash around in the hot, dry weather that was coming on. So then I did have 3 otters show up a little bit later, but not in as good a light as the earlier ones. And then my last surprise was I'm sitting there, and this duck comes around the corner. And if you notice the colors of the female, she's brown, basically all brown. And this is a female head. You see I think it's the second year male back there, and he's not in nuptial plumage, so he doesn't give us a good view of what the male looks like. But you can see the eye color and the beak color on him. This one doesn't have it, and it's got the teardrop around the eye. What is going on? Well, I did a little research, and I found a site to check on. And what happens is the old females don't produce enough estrogen, and they can't mask the color pattern of the male bird, and so they take on this coloration. They take on mostly male, mostly like the male, that chestnut, that stripe, the whole thing is mostly the male color pattern that they take on. And that was a surprise to me. I've been on banding operations where we banded 4,700 wood ducks and had thousands get away, and we never saw anything like this. This was just that unusual. So you can imagine my surprise when I went back and had 2 of these hens show up at the same spot. I sent this picture to the guy. I corresponded with him, a guy from California, about this senescent old females losing their ability to maintain the normal female color pattern. I'd sent the picture of the one, and then I sent this picture, and I said I got 2 of them. He wrote back to me and he said, "Oh, it looks like the same one." I think he thought I knew how to use Photoshop. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't know how to do it. I actually had 2 of them show up. I don't think he believed me that there was actually 2 of these senescent old females showing up in the same place at the same time. And so that was the totally unexpected. I think she's kind of cute. Mallard was on there now and had 1 duckling, and she was pretty protective, trying to get that one raised. And that's the end. I did go back a little later and got another picture of the ruby-throated hummingbird. I'm done. Thank you for coming. I guess we'll have time for a few questions.
She's got a question there.
She does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was there ever any conflict between the beaver and the muskrats and the mink? Was there they get along okay?
I never saw any conflict. Now, mink eat muskrats. Yeah, they do. And it gets a little hairy when the mink and the muskrat are about the same size. Charles Long, in his book on the wild mammals of Wisconsin, talks about seeing a mink and a muskrat fighting, and the muskrat wins the battle and the mink takes off. And he says that muskrat was running up and down the bank looking for more worlds to conquer. He said, and I wanted to stay out of his way.
How did you plan your photography in terms of time of day?
Most of the time I went in 45 minutes before sunup and spent 4.5 hours in the blind. Then I'd throw in some evening sessions and whatever, but that early morning sun coming up behind me, of course, was really nice. Of course, the trout jumping with the sun behind him was extra good too. But yeah, mostly it was not much midday activity on my part in that regard, trying to get a little more wildlife activity morning and evening type.
Did you ever see any little green herons?
Never had a little green heron come. Now, there were some other things that were just weird. I never saw a frog. Had all that mud flat, you'd think there'd be frogs running up and down the mud flat, and there would be frogs singing. I could hear them in various places around the wetlands, but I never saw a frog.
Is the
What happened to the beaver? Is he still there?
I think they'd run out of resources. My impression is they probably saw the situation of we're not going to be able to do a food stash here for this winter, and that they moved out. That's kind of what they do on these places. A gentleman here was telling me that he has beaver that come in every 3 or 4 years or so and set up a colony and maybe last 2 years
Yeah.
and
they split, yeah.
and then
They've gone on for
then
18 years, yeah.
then they're gone. So they kind of rotate back and forth. Now, if they got an area where there's enough willow or aspen or whatever, then they can persist for a long period of time, and you can have the beaver dam continuous thing. But a lot of these little hollows, they come up to these little streams there, they're not going to have a food source that's going to last them a very long time.
I thought you had said at one time that the landowner wanted to get rid of the pond. But they didn't.
Yeah, the landowner told me when I asked him if I could go in and set up, yeah, he said, I'm going to have somebody come in and remove the dam in June. And I was going in April. Well, it got close to June, and I talked to him again, and he said, well, and pretty soon he said, well, I'll let you have your year. So I got my full year, and then he didn't plant any corn close to it this past year, because maybe that would have tempted them to stay, and they might have built the food cache again from that. But because they did incorporate a lot of corn into their. On the big picture, they didn't take near as much as the deer and the raccoons were taking out of the field, but theirs was kind of local. You could see it, and for the farmer, it was additive to what was depressing his profits, and so he was concerned.
Were they bank beavers or did they have a lodge?
They were bank beavers. Yeah, the pond is down quite a ways now. I just went in the other day. I hadn't been there for a while, and I went up around to where I knew where the bank den was, but I could never see it before. And now it was down to where the opening going into the bank was visible.
So that brings up another question. So is there a difference between bank beavers and lodge beavers? On the Mississippi, there are ones that are making on the bank. Is there actually a genetic difference or anything?
I don't think so. I think it's just a matter of opportunity. If they can make a bank dam, then they will, and if they can't, well, then they're going to build a lodge. And the other thing was this never completely froze over. It was 19 below one morning, and you could see the ice out most of the way on it, but it never completely froze over because all that water was coming in from less than a mile away. 47 degrees out of the ground, and it didn't freeze over.
Now, they do have to have a vent so they can breathe too.
Okay.
Your bank, I've noticed way in the back, like 20 or 30 feet, you'll see a hole.
Okay.
Well, that's where the beaver will have to have a vent. So
Yeah, and this den was you could come around there and there was a higher bank, so they could den there. But it was also cornfield right on, virtually on top of it. They didn't have to go very far to get their corn, and so I don't know. The combine never fell through going over it.
And in the wintertime, when it's cold on their lodge, you can see on the top where the steam is coming out.
Okay, yeah, they leave it thin enough there to vent out, yeah.
So since trees and will tend to grow in that dam, is there eventually a strip of trees that will stay permanently where that dam was?
I don't know. I think.
Well, I think I've
yeah.
seen that, and
Okay.
it didn't sink into me.
Yeah.
The willows would grow there.
Yeah, you can see remnants of the dam for
Yeah.
sometimes a century after, depending on the situation, that there'll still be that evidence.
I would add that if you've got any seeps or springs, you can go in and build a beaver dam analog or a post-assisted log structure, back up a little bit of water, and if there's food around, the beaver will come in. I've had that happen at my place, and it's just a treat because there's actually a website and Bengal Farms and a lot of them have got, but you can get there's even a handbook from the low-tech process-based restoration folks, LTPBR out of University of Utah, and it gives you instructions on how to build a beaver dam analog. in 4-inch lifts with mud and willow stakes and weaving them in. And I've done that quite successfully and protected losing a pond, or actually take something with a few seeps and build one, and then have enough water where the beaver feel safe, and then they come in and populate it.
Yeah, now Brad Strobel, the biologist at Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, had started some, but he didn't have any luck with it, and I don't know why. Not sure what happened on that, but
You gotta have food around, like you were saying, if you can build one, and if there's no saplings and willows, but they'll take hazels and, like you say, box elders. They seem to choose white oaks.
Oh, yeah, I've seen white oaks that were eaten.
Wherever I have beaver, I have to put wires around the trees, and rather than fight the beavers, I just protect for with wires, and then we coexist.
Yeah, and one other thing I didn't mention at all that happens now in connection with beaver is water levelers, pond levelers. They put these things in and they build a fence so that the beaver can't get 2 of them on the upside. They extend it out on the bottom side, and the beaver can't flood driveways and roads or fields or whatever because they can't get the water to rise any higher. The culvert or PVC or whatever is used drains the pond and keeps it down to a certain level, which has been used a lot to make a compatibility between beaver and human usage. If we ever get 50% of the beaver back that we had originally in North America, that would be a remarkable event and just a lot of habitat that would come as a consequence of it. Okay.